Just a heads up that this podcast deals with violence against women. If this topic isn't for you today, maybe skip today's deep dive and we'll be back this afternoon for your evening headlines.
Hello and welcome to the Daily Aus. I'm Billi FitzSimons.
I'm Zara Seidler.
Last month, the body of a 19-year-old girl, Audrey Griffin, was found in a creek on New South Wales' Central Coast. She had disappeared after walking home from a night out with her friends. Police said at the time that her death was not suspicious, but this week, police charged a 53-year-old man who was not known to her with her murder. On today's podcast, we are going to explain what we know about the death of 19-year-old Audrey Griffin, and we're also going to take a broader look at what the major parties are promising to do when it comes to domestic violence in this country.
Billi, there are obviously so many horrific stories that we have to cover as part of the daily news cycle, and this is one of those stories. It's a really shocking one, but for anyone that's not familiar with this story, what happened to 19-year-old Audrey Griffin?
So this goes back to March, to last month. And so it was on Sunday, the 23rd of March, that we know a 19-year-old girl named Audrey was walking home from a night out with her friends in New South Wales' Central Coast. And we know that she was trying to get an Uber or a taxi, and that was at about 2 a.m. that she left her friends to try to get a ride home. Then we know that her friends hadn't heard from her and they hadn't heard that she had got home safe, and so they called the police. And at about 3 a.m. on that Sunday morning, police were notified of the disappearance of Audrey. Now, police then went to try and find Audrey and they couldn't find her, and that caused a missing person investigation. So that was on the Sunday morning, and then it was on the Monday afternoon that police found the body of Audrey in Erina on the Central Coast. And at the time, police said the death was not suspicious. Now, I thought it was just worth explaining because we covered this on the Daily Aus, and there were a few comments saying, why did we not hear about this at the time that a girl who was 19 years old had disappeared and had died? And the reason for that is just from a media perspective, usually when something is deemed as not suspicious, then the media won't report on it unless, of course, it's a high profile person. But it's only when there is a crime involved that then the media usually starts reporting on a story like that.
And I think this idea of it moving from being a non-suspicious death to a suspicious death is what is so remarkable about the story, because for those few weeks, police didn't suspect foul play. They didn't suspect that anyone was responsible for her death, right?
Yeah, and it only changed last week when police appealed for further information from the public about the incident. And then it was on Monday this week that New South Wales police revealed a 53-year-old man had been arrested in Surrey Hills in Sydney and charged with murder in relation to the teenager's death. Now, we don't know too many details, but I'll go through what we do know about the alleged crime at this point. So New South Wales police alleged the man was involved in a physical altercation with the victim prior to the alleged murder. We also know that the two were not known to each other. So they, as far as we know, were strangers to each other who just crossed paths in the early hours of that morning when the teenager was trying to get home. We also know that when the man was arrested this week, he was actually also charged with 11 other domestic violence matters that were not related to this alleged murder. So those are charges relating to another alleged victim, nothing to do with the alleged murder of Audrey Griffin, as far as we know.
I don't want to over-explain here, but I do just want to talk about the fact that you've said alleged a number of times at this point, because I think that for people who read the news and read of crimes, it can sometimes be jarring to read or hear the word alleged that many times, like you just mentioned in that one sentence alone. But just to be really clear, we have to say alleged because there has been nothing proven in the court of law that suggests that this man who was charged has been found guilty. And until such time as somebody is found guilty in the court of law, we continue to say alleged. So just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, and just to explain when we need to use it. So when we explain Audrey's death, we don't need to use the word alleged because obviously that is a fact. But when we use the term murder, that is when we have to say that is a crime. And so that's an alleged crime that, like you said, has not been proven yet.
And now to talk through that process that is on foot. So you mentioned that the man was arrested in Surrey Hills in Sydney earlier this week. He's now, I imagine, still in custody.
Yes, he's in custody. He did appear in court on Tuesday and he didn't apply for bail, so he'll remain in custody until at least the court case happens.
The first interaction I had with this story was reading Audrey's mother's words. She spoke directly to the Sydney Morning Herald a few days ago about the impact of her daughter's loss. What have we heard from the family, especially in light of her death initially being deemed non-suspicious and then an arrest mere weeks later?
Yeah, so before this man was charged with the alleged murder, the family had, of course, already had a funeral and said their goodbyes to Audrey, and they set up a GoFundMe page to help with the funds that came from the unexpected death and funeral of Audrey. And I thought I'd read out how they described Audrey because I think it tells us a bit about who she was as a person. They said, Audrey touched everyone, not just in her community, but all over the country. She was the light in many of our lives. There is no doubt she brought endless laughter and joy to everyone. She was the kindest soul to walk this earth and will always be in our hearts. Now, since it was revealed that someone has been charged with her murder, the mum, like you said, Zara, has also spoken to Sydney Morning Herald about what she knows of Audrey's final moments. She told the publication she'd actually had a conversation with her friends saying that she was going to catch a cab soon and that she was just walking home and that she was going to call a cab. She'd obviously gone along the waterfront to try and get a cab because there were none. So that kind of tells us what we know about the last hour or so of her life when she was trying to get home safely via a cab, but couldn't find one.
And obviously we will learn more about the timeline that led to her death once that court case kicks off. But Billi, I do want to zoom out just for a moment because this alleged murder is by no means an isolated incident here in Australia. And it does feel like at specific moments in time, the nation deals with this theme of recurring domestic violence and violence against women. Can you paint a bit more of a picture about this?
Hi there, my name's Emma. I'm the editor at the Daily Aus, just popping in to say hi and let you know that here at the Daily Aus, we are an independent media company who work to break down the news for young Aussies in a digestible and accessible way. If you like what you're watching and you like what we do, please hit the subscribe button. Now back to the video.
Yeah, so the 19-year-old's death marks the 22nd Australian woman to be murdered this year, and that's according to the Australian Femicide Watch. And obviously, just a reminder, we're only 4 months into this year, so that's 22 women in 4 months. And that tally tracks every known Australian woman and child killed as a result of murder, manslaughter or neglect.
When we uploaded this to Instagram, I was scrolling through the comments and amongst all of the grief being conveyed in that comment section was quite a lot of anger directed to Australia's political leaders, especially as we know we are in the middle of an election cycle. And so while not wanting to politicise this conversation, I am keen to get a bit of a sense as to what both sides of politics are proposing to do when it comes to keeping women safe in this country.
I'm interested in your thoughts. I don't think it has been an issue that has dominated this election cycle.
Not at all.
Yeah.
I truly don't know if I've heard either of them talk about it on the campaign trail.
Which is surprising considering I feel like this time last year there was a real moment of so many protests and marches and a real national conversation about violence against women. And it did cut through to the political landscape at that time. But yeah, during this election campaign, it really hasn't been spoken about.
It's interesting the disconnect that emerges because so many people I know are talking about it and posting about it. And yet, as you said, it's not really being reflected onto the national stage. So really interesting to unpack. But we do have commitments from both sides.
Yeah, and before we get into what they're promising, I might just do a quick overview of something that's called our national plan, because that is the main policy used in this area. So in Australia, we have something called the National Plan to End Violence Against Women and Children. And it is a 10-year plan. So it was revealed by the government in 2022, and so that will take us through to 2032. And it's actually the second plan of its kind, because the first one was launched by then Prime Minister Julia Gillard in 2010. Now that first plan, which also was a 10-year plan, failed in its goal, which was to see, quote, a significant and sustained reduction in violence against women and their children. It did, though, lead to some new services, for example, 1-800-RESPECT, which you might be familiar with. That is a helpline for people dealing with domestic violence. That was a direct result of that first national plan. It also led to the creation of Our Watch, which you also might be familiar with. But overall, we did not see a reduction in the prevalence of violence against women. And just for some context, governments at all levels, because this wasn't just a federal government plan, it was an agreement between the federal government and the state and territory governments to deal with this crisis. And they spent a collective $3 billion on that plan over the decade. So that one failed. And when the new one was launched, it kind of tried to learn from what didn't work in that first one. One way it did that is, for the first time, the new plan said that it was going to include the importance of engaging men and boys. And so that goes to them taking more of a preventative approach with the second plan and spending more resources on educating men and society more broadly on the issue. One thing that I do want to point out, though, is that since that national plan has come into effect in 2022, the number of women who have been killed by violence in the country has actually increased every single year over the last couple of years since this plan was launched. So that kind of tells us that at the moment that isn't quite working in terms of its specific goal of reducing violence against women.
And you've put this to the Minister for Women herself, Katie Gallagher, and she's, admitted and conceded that there is so much more work to be done.
And I also put it to the Prime Minister.
Yeah, exactly. So with that forward view, what are they both proposing can be done here?
So I'll go through Labor and the Coalition. Earlier this week, Labor launched something called Building Australia's Future, Labor's Commitment to Women, which is their central policy platform when it comes to women in Australia. Now, that policy document clearly states, every woman deserves to live in safety, free from the threat of violence. It runs through what they've already done in their current term of government. So that includes $4 billion in funding on gender-based violence. It includes boosting frontline services support and also investing in housing for women to flee to if they need to. However, the party also acknowledges that more must change urgently. Those are their words. Labor says that if it is re-elected, it will invest $85 million in targeted approaches to identify and respond to high-risk perpetrators. So that's more of an early intervention approach. And Labor also said that it will take a coordinated approach to engaging men and boys in violence prevention, as well as invest $80 million in, quote, breaking the cycles of trauma. And then they also will have a more targeted approach for First Nations communities. So they have said that they will deliver the first ever National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Family Safety Plan.
Okay, so that's what Labor is saying they will do to address the rate of men's violence against women in this country. What have we heard from the Coalition?
So the Coalition has also proposed a plan to combat the, quote, scourge of family and domestic violence. Specifically, they've promised to support the extension of emergency payments to support women and children fleeing domestic violence, as well as make it an offence to use phones or computers to cause a partner to fear their personal safety. Also, if the Coalition is elected, it says that it will work with states and territories to develop uniform knife laws across the country, and it will also increase resources to the Australian Centre to Counter Child Exploitation.
So both sides of politics are acknowledging here that there is an issue in the country when it comes to men's violence against women, but perhaps going about fixing it in different ways. Billi, thank you for taking us through that story. And for any listeners, if this has raised any issues for you, a reminder that help is available 24/7 at 1-800-RESPECT. That's 1-800-737-732. Take care of yourselves, and we'll be back later today.